packaging design is a little unique from other avenues of graphic design in that it functions on many different levels. You could be designing the container or the vessel or the carrier of the product. So you're dealing with industrial design. You're also designing a logo and graphics, color palettes, and fonts that you use. So it's functioning as branding. And then it also functions oftentimes, especially in a retail setting, as advertising because your product's going to be on the shelf next to competitors and it needs to kind of sell itself uh, against all its neighbors on the shelf. So I want to talk a little bit about the retail environment here because with your beverage assignment, that's going to be really key to your design on here. Before we get to that, let's talk a little bit about the history of your standard grocery store. Back in the old days, the way the grocery store worked was all the products were behind the front shelf or the front desk. You would walk into the grocery store with your list, you would hand it to a clerk. They would go amongst all the products and collect everything else, bring it up to the register where you would pay for it. Back in the early years of the 20th century, that's when you saw retailing, especially for grocery stores, switch from that very kind of labor intensive, having someone else pull uh, your products or your shopping list, to the idea of self-service, where you as the consumer were allowed to roam the aisles, take your time, pick the products you wanted, then bring it up to the front desk or the front counter to pay for it. And there's a psychology involved with how most modern grocery stores are laid out. So this is kind of a typical layout that you see. And what you'll notice is ringing the edge of the store, you'll see the produce, the bakery, meat and seafood, dairy, oftentimes the wine and spirits. Those are all on the outer edge of the store, and you'll notice the aisles and the walkways are much more kind of spacious. Part of the reason for that is all those items, the produce, the bakery, the meat and the seafood, those are all high value items for the grocery store. Those are things where they have higher margins that they can sell for. So they want to make the shopping through those departments, give you an opportunity to kind of do your own exploring on there. You'll notice here in the center of the store, that's where all you see all the packaged box goods that we've dealt with the last assignment. And you'll notice on those aisles, the aisles are considerably narrower, and that's because all those products, the store doesn't have a whole lot of markup room on that. The manufacturers set the prices. They're competing with other retailers who have the exact same product. And so the store doesn't make a whole lot of money on all the stuff on the center shelves. Where they make the bulk of their money is in produce and bakery and meat and some of the other, like I said, more high value products there. The other thing about the psychology of store design too is when you're walking up and down the aisles, we tend to look right and pay more attention to the things that are passing on our right, but we only kind of scan to the left. So determining what order or what direction you think people are going to travel through the store can also determine where things get placed in the store. We also tend to linger at the end of aisles, so you'll notice oftentimes in the grocery store, manufacturers will actually pay to have unique display cases or display of their displays of their goods. They'll pay extra to have a unique display at the end of the aisles on here. So once you kind of understand the architecture of the store and the psychology of the store, and the thing to keep in mind too, the reason we kind of look to the right and scan to the left, some people think that has to do with the way we drive in this country. We drive on the right-hand side of the road. So if you go to a grocery store in the UK, the psychology is going to be a little different. You'll probably look to the left but scan to the right. So understanding how your product is going to be displayed in the store and more importantly, how it's going to be compared to its competitors is kind of crucial. Now, what you'll notice if you ever walk down the cereal aisle of the grocery store, all the kind of good for you, healthy, what we would consider adult cereals tend to be up higher, but you'll notice all the really bad for you, high sugar, cereals, they're placed at the lower eye level, which happens to be the eye level of most of the little kids that may be accompanying mom or dad to the store. So again, lots of bright colors, cartoon characters, anything that's going to get the kid to try and get mom or dad to buy the big flashy sugary cereal that they probably shouldn't buy. For you with your beverage or your beverage assignment here, designing not just the labeling and the carrier the graphics for it, it's important that you understand who your competitors are and how you can stand out on the shelf. So if you do your research and find out all your competitors for your particular beverage are using reds and warm colors, then your decision is, do you want to look like you're part of the same category and stay with that same color scheme, or do you want to maybe go with blues and greens and cool colors so that you stand out compared to your competitors? So that's where your research is going to come in handy in here. So here you can see some different ways. Again, the color scheme on a lot of these are all similar, but they've tried to differentiate it through the graphics and the logos on here. The other thing with beverage packaging design you have to keep in mind is oftentimes your beverage may not always be sold only in the 4 or 6 pack carriers. They may be individually aligned on the shelf too. So you have to make sure not only does the carrier sell itself or sell your brand, but the individual bottles, if they're broken out of their packaging and sold individually, that they're going to have enough of a presence as well. So how you approach the label, and again, what you're required to do for the class is to obviously do the label on the bottle. If you want to do, and you'll see some examples on here, a secondary neck label, you can do that too. Here on the left, you can see a design where they've used the die cut, where the center of the O has been cut out so you can see the beverage through it. That might be one way to draw more attention to it. And you'll also notice here just different approaches to the labels. On the left, it looks a little cleaner, more minimal, more sophisticated. On the right, they're really kind of pushing the pictures of the fruit to give you a much more immediate idea of what the flavor is on it. One thing you'll notice too with label design, especially if you're dealing in the beer category, you have a lot of ability to add special treatments in the printing process, and one thing you often see is using metallics. So it might be metallic ink, or it might actually be a foil backed layer or a foil label on there. There's other type of kind of holographic paper that you can use on some of these. So that might be something that you could use to stand out on the shelf as well. And again, the key to here is really understanding who your market is what the age group is that you're aiming for. Is there a breakdown whether it really aims more towards men or women? Here you can see some designs on the left that kind of, again, a little bit more sophisticated, a little bit more minimal. And then you get the lager bottles on the right, which have a little bit of a humorous touch to it with the masks there. The other thing too, and you see this with products that have various different flavors, one of the ways they can differentiate that is by using patterns. So that's a very common technique in packaging design. Beverages are one category where you can have a little bit of a sense of humor with it, depending on the name that you choose for it. So here you've got various flavors, and especially in the craft beer market, there's a lot of very kind of clever packaging that goes into a lot of the craft, small scale artisanal beer brands here. So here you have zombie beer, and instead of light or dark, they've got dawn, night, and day. And as I mentioned, you can have a certain amount of humor with it if it fits your brand. If you're selling a really expensive wine, you may not want to go humorous with it because that's not going to get you the price point you want. The humor can maybe drop it down and not make it feel like it's worth spending the amount of money you want to get for an expensive wine. As I mentioned, oftentimes these beverages aren't just sold in the carriers. They are broken out and sold individually on the shelf. And one thing you'll notice too with a lot of current label design is an effect we call billboarding, where maybe you have a wider label. And remember, when you're designing for a label, you're designing for a cylindrical surface here. So if you look at the Night Owl Brewery on the right here, the area of the bottle that's really directly facing the consumer is going to be that area you see with the body of the owl on there. Now, as the label wraps around, obviously you're going to lose the illustration and lose the detail on it. But the idea of billboarding is you design your labeling so when they're arranged on a shelf and they're rotated in a specific way, you can get the labels to line up and create a bigger image on the shelf, which is going to draw more attention to it. Some other examples on the left. These are bottles that are actually printed or essentially painted, where the labeling is not or the graphics are not a label, but they're actually printed on the bottle. There you can see on the right some more examples of a little bit of a humorous take. Again, you see that a lot with the craft beverages. More examples, and again, another option you have too for your design for extra credit. In addition to doing maybe a neck label for extra credit, you can also design a custom bottle cap to go on your beverage. So some other examples. On the right, another minimal example, kind of tapping into the kind of 80s Memphis style. This I thought was really funny if you're familiar with Pantone color. Here you've got some bottles that are designed to look essentially like metallic Pantone swatches. What you can do with your label design too is use graphic devices. And one of the things you see with a lot of the kind of all the craft beers that are being done, there's really kind of this look where it goes. We kind of, it's kind of derogatory, but we tend to refer to it as hipster design. It's kind of using this kind of vintage look with banners and seals and all the type of things that kind of call back almost more to Victorian design, but definitely kind of has that vintage retro feel to it. Now, that's a design trend that's been going on for over 10 years now. I keep thinking it's on the verge of dying out, but it's got staying power to it, and you still see this kind of retro vintage look with a lot of beverages. Here you can really see these are definitely what we would call the hipster logos. For lack of a better description, it's kind of the label look where it almost looks like a scout badge or something. So one of the things we always make fun of too is this thing with the crossed elements in the middle. Here you've got the canoe paddles or the rifles, and you've got the established year here and everything. Now, if it's done well, and it looks great, but just be aware that this look is, as I mentioned, I tend to think it's a little played out, and yet it still keeps ticking. So if it fits your beverage, by all means, you may want to explore it. Graphic devices can also transfer from your label onto the carrier itself. So here you can see the graphic of the gear. That's part of the branding, and you can see it's worked into the label. It's also worked into the graphics of the carrier as well. Even into the logo, you can see the gear in here as part of the Frisco City Grainworks on there. So how you decide to use that, again, here's some examples too. Now, these tend to kind of have a retro or vintage look to it, but they definitely feel modern. So it's a modern take on more of a vintage feel to it. As I mentioned, you can have a sense of humor depending on your brand. So here, really playing off of Mexican wrestling masks. You'll also notice on the label too, they've got the little silhouette of the wrestler on there as well. More examples, again, on the left here, you've got the little green men really playing up the whole alien idea. There you have the flying saucer. And here you can see a custom design on the carrier where this is just an additional die cut shape on here forming the little flying saucer on here. Be aware though, if you designed anything that's got these extraneous panels as part of a die cut, these are really in a retail environment, in a store where you have, high school kids stocking the shelves. These things are really easy to tear off and can actually make your brand look really kind of tattered and ragged on the shelf. On the right, another example of more of that retro vintage style. What's interesting here is they've actually put a photo of the bottle with the label on the carrier. So when you look at it, it looks like you're looking at the whole bottle on there. This was a brand, and I think they just do a really great uh, uh, they do a really great job with their branding on here. So it's Brooks Dry Cider, and they've really gone not just with the bear as an icon, but this very specific kind of engraved woodblock print look of the graphics on here. What you're looking at on the right, that's actually the back of the label as you're looking through the beverage. So they've taken advantage of the fact that if your beverage is light enough that you can see through it, it's another opportunity to get a branding moment in here on actually the reverse of the label that you look through the beverage at. And then here you can see an example of kind of that billboarding effect where the carrier, the graphics on the carrier, the engraving or the woodcut of the bear wraps around the sides. So as these are aligned on the shelf, maybe alternating long side to short side, it makes the illustration look like it spans the packaging, makes a bigger impact on the shelf. And their branding actually even carries over into the boxes that the beverages are shipped into. So here's a down shot on the interior of the cardboard box that these initially shipped from. Do your research on here. If you're for the assignment, I would really recommend creating your own brand. But if you do an existing brand, make sure you've done your research and you know what the existing logos are and understand what the kind of conventions of your beverage category are. Now, that doesn't mean you have to follow them, but it's good to know what's out there. So as you design your logo and your branding for your beverage, you don't want to ever look like one of your arch competitors in here. So understanding all the other brands in your category is going to be key. The design isn't just of the label for your bottle. It's also going to come down to the design of the carrier as well. Now, because we're in a virtual environment this semester, normally on this assignment, we would actually be working with printing technology and be able to come up with some unique ways of creating carriers. And if you'd like to, you can still do that. We can do digital mock-ups of just about anything. So if you do want to do something beyond a conventional 4-bottle or 6-bottle carrier, you can do that. Here you can see some more interesting designs. One thing too you'll notice with a lot of existing brands, just so they can constantly refresh the brand, here you can see Diet Coke and Bud Light. They will periodically do special runs of special packaging. Maybe it's tied to an event like the Super Bowl or the Olympics, or maybe it's just every summer season they come out with a new look. And it's always in a effort to really refresh the brand so the brand doesn't end up looking tired and stale over time. Here's some additional examples of different way of doing carriers. These were interesting, where they kind of each bottle's in its own little sleeve here, and they kind of fold together and form a conventional square packaging, but you can see it's a different way of getting the different bottles in there. This is also good for, in this case, this is kind of a sampler pack, so they're able to put one of each of the flavors of the beer in each of the different sleeves, and then they all fold in on each other and make one carrier for a sampler. So coming up with unique ways to do a carrier, here's an example too. The other thing, and we've mentioned throughout the semester, one of the ongoing trends is really towards sustainability. And so coming up with ways of creating carriers for your beverage that use less cardboard, that will result in less landfill. Here's one example of doing that. Now, how practical it is, I'm not sure, because it really doesn't do anything to protect the bottles in there. But that's one example of kind of approaching this from a sustainability angle. Here's a custom design again too. This has the little special die cut on the ends. Again, the idea here is to make the carrier actually look like a old school red barn. But then it also has a die cut window in here where you can actually on the end see one of the actual bottles in there. Another example of minimal packaging designed with an eye towards sustainability. And so your focus on your beverage design, I would start with your logo and your label design. And then if you want to branch out and build your carrier graphics or potentially come up with a unique carrier design, should kind of be built off your branding. So for everyone on the beverage assignment, I would really start with your branding first and then move on from there.